I was 8 years old, and I actually remember going to my mother at age 8 and saying, "Ma, just so you know, when I'm 18 and I graduate high school, I'm going to move to New York City and work for the Muppets." Like, I just said it like that. My mom, of course, being a performer, was like, "Okay," thinking, "Yeah, sure, whatever." I was teased, yeah. I mean, I already was the weird kid because, I grew up in a very blue-collar neighborhood for the first part of my life. And the fact that I was already into arts, that I was doing theater, was weird enough. And then to add on top of it that I loved puppets was even worse. So I was totally teased and totally made fun of. And it's funny, all of it, and that went all the way through like my second year of high school, when all of a sudden I started working with the Muppets, and then it became cool. For other people, they'd be like, "Oh, you went to New York this weekend? You worked with the Muppets? What? Are you serious?" Then all of a sudden it was. I was like, "Oh, now you guys think it's really cool." But it was, and I understand that now because it was an odd thing. And I think that's the reason Kevin and I got along so well, was because he saw that. He knew that being that kid that was, the inside kid who sat inside and made puppets while everyone else was outside playing soccer. And so I think we always related on that. And I think that it was a bonding thing for us because we were like, "You were that kid too. You got beat up? Me too. Okay." I was 12 years old when I worked with Jim Henson. Or was I 11? I always get confused. I think I was 12. And I wrote a letter that I think was so from the heart, because I think when you're that young, you don't edit yourself. You don't go back and white out and delete. You just write from your heart. And I remember writing that he was a hero to me and that I wanted to be a puppeteer since I was 8, and I was in love with the Muppets, and my dream is to work for him someday and to meet him. And it's this very, I wish I had a copy of it because I remember writing it and spending so much time on it, and being up in my bedroom. And about a year later, I remember it was 2 o'clock, and our mail always came at 2:45. It was 2 o'clock, and I remember sitting down and saying, "Well, I'm going to write another letter because maybe Jim just didn't get it." So I went to my room, got some paper, and right then I heard the mail come. And I went outside, and there was a package from the Jim Henson Company. It was really weird that it was the same day. And of course I freaked out, and I opened it up like it was, gold, crystalline gold, and I opened it up and pulled it out, and it was a beautiful signed photo from Jim Henson to me. And a letter from his secretary saying that Jim was out of town, but that the secretaries were so moved by my letter that they were going to have Jim, they were going to have Jim read it when he got home. But then, I guess, not too long after that, Jim passed away. So it was weird, though. I remember being completely devastated that he had passed, but yet also feeling like there was more. I don't know why, and it's such a profound thing to have at 11 or 12 years old, but I remember feeling like, okay, this isn't over yet. And that's when I wrote to Kevin. And I just wanted to write a letter to him to say, I think you're amazing. I think you're an incredible manipulator, incredible puppeteer. Your voices are wonderful. I was getting very, nerdy serious at 14 about puppetry. I could tell you who did what character and when and what voice, so I was very into it. And I wrote him this letter, and a few months later, I got a phone call at about 9 o'clock at night, on school night. I remember all this because I was doing my homework. And my stepfather said, "Hey, John." I said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a call from a Kevin Mash." And I was like, "Who?" So I went over to the phone, picked it up, and I hear this low voice, and, "Hey, John, this is Kevin Clash." And I was like, I remember being in my kitchen, like to know what was going on. I'm totally freaking out. And this is why I got beat up a lot. Anyway, and Kevin was so wonderful. He said, "Yeah," he said, "I got your letter, and thank you so much." I said, "Oh, thank you so much." I don't think I said anything intelligible. And he said, "Jim used to talk about you." And I remember my whole body's freezing. I said, "He did?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Jim talked about your letter to me." And I remember maybe a couple weeks later, I was pulling up in a cab to the old Henson studio on East 67th Street and freaking out because I was going to meet Kevin Clash and see the Muppets. And he took me inside, and I tried on Cookie Monster, I tried on Bert, all these classic characters, and I did the voices for him. And I remember saying, "Wow," being, I think, impressed with my puppetry, which, at the time, I didn't know if I was good or not, I just did what I did. And from that, he said, "Well, we're going to have this big workshop, which is basically where we audition puppeteers. Would you want to come up for that?" Of course, I was like, "Yes, of course." Here I was, 15 years old, in the middle of New York City, with all of these, adults auditioning to be a Muppeteer. And Kevin was amazing. He was so great with me. And I think at that age, I was very blessed because I was a really good manipulator, which is usually one of the hardest things to learn is, the eye focus and the lip sync and all of that. And I guess because I was so obsessed with the Muppets growing up, I had studied it so well that I had a natural instinct for it, I guess. And that's how I got started. That was my long journey to Sesame Street or to the Muppets. You know, when you're learning to puppeteer for the Muppet style puppetry, which is what I learned and what Kevin taught me, is, you know, there's so many different ways to do it. And I remember being in the workshop when I was 16 and having a puppet on, and, you know, I thought I was lip syncing really well and blah, 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 blah. And Kevin's like, no. Don't do the same movement for every word. Change it up. I was like, what do you mean? I mean, I remember being like, what are you saying? You're criticizing me. And he said, you know, how does a human mouth move? You know, you don't when you make the sound ooh, you don't have your mouth wide open, right? And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, just say how are you and change the way you move your hand. And I remember doing it first the way I was doing it, which was how are you? And they said, no, try it the other way. I went, how are you? And all of a sudden it was like, oh, you know, I remember little things like that Kevin would teach me that Jim had taught him that, you know, you don't always do every single syllable because if you do it, the puppet's really nervous. But if you skip a couple syllables here and there, then you kind of believe it's still moving at the same time, but it looks much more calm. I mean, these little things that no other profession would ever worry about puppetry, but Kevin taught, and you know, he learned from Jim, he learned from Frank Oz, he learned from the best. I think that he's a god of manipulation that way, that I can always watch him and learn how he manipulates, because it's really, it's an amazing art.